Children, those who have seen my video of the actual and potential economic growth, I think so. They have in their mind that what is actual and potential economic growth. That actual economic growth is what the country is actually achieving. और potential क्या था? I told you कि potential क्या होता है? आपका caliber. So means that what resources you are already having and you are not utilizing, but you can utilize them. आप उनको यूटिलाइज करके इकोनॉमिक ग्रोथ अचीव कर सकते हो. So that is the potential economic growth. Now, you know that there is always a difference in the actual and the potential economic growth. If the actual economic growth is less than the potential economic growth, which normally happens, ठीक है ना? अक्सर इकोनॉमीज में ऐसी ही सिचुएशन है that the actual is lesser than the potential. It is known as negative output gap. ठीक है, ये नेगेटिव हो गया बिकॉज एक्चुअल इज लेसर, पोटेंशियल ज्यादा था. So now let's get it graphically done. If this is your, definitely I'm going to draw your graph. So it is that this is going to be the price. This is going to be the real GDP. Again, the labeling is very much important. So it is that if this is your short run average supply curve and this is your aggregate demand curve. These are the basic structure of the market that I have drawn, and this is the where your resources are being fully employed, and this is the price of the resources. This is the equilibrium price, and this is where the resources are being fully employed. Now it is that if the actually they are producing at this level Y1, which is lesser than long run average supply curve, which is lesser than your potential. ठीक है, I told you कि ये आपका potential है because this is what you can do with the equilibrium. But what they are doing over here? So this gap is known as a negative gap between the output and the actual output and the potential output. So this is the negative output gap. Again, if your actual output is more than the potential, ठीक है, अब एक ये क्वेश्चन हमारे माइंड में आ गया कि ये कैसे हो सकता है कि हमारी एक्चुअल जो है वो ज़्यादा हो जाए, पोटेंशियल हमारा कम था. ठीक है, दिस कैन ऑल्सो हैपन. ठीक है, हाउ इट कैन हैपन? अगेन, दिस इज द रियल GDP and this is the price. This is the aggregate demand curve and this is the short run aggregate supply. This is the point of the full equilibrium where the resources are at full equilibrium, and this is the price. Now it is that the economy has a potential of this and they are actually producing at this point. So now how can this happen? ठीक है, कि ये कैसे हो गया कि हमारा एक्चुअल जो हमारा पोटेंशियल था वो तो ये था, लेकिन हम इस पॉइंट पे कैसे प्रोड्यूस करना शुरू हो गए? इट इज ओनली इन द शॉर्ट रन. ठीक है, टू कीप दिस इन योर माइंड, इट इज ओनली इन द शॉर्ट रन. ये लॉन्ग रन में नहीं हो सकता क्योंकि फॉर अ शॉर्टर पीरियड ऑफ टाइम हम क्या करते हैं कि हम अपनी ज़्यादा लेबर हायर कर लेते हैं, मीन स्किलफुल प्लस अनस्किल्ड लेबर, हम उन दोनों को यूज़ कर लेंगे। हमारे पास कैपिटल है, हम उसको यूज़ नहीं कर रहे थे, सो नाउ वी आर गोइंग टू यूज़ आर कैपिटल, हम अपने कैपिटल को यूज़ कर लेंगे। दो हमारा कैपिटल एग्जॉस्ट हो जाएगा, बट डेफिनेटली फॉर द टाइम बीइंग वी वुड बी एबल टू प्रोड्यूस अ लिटल मोर क्वांटिटी. So it is that in over here you can clearly see that your potential was at this point, but actually we are producing at this point. So this is the positive output gap. Now the children, the important thing is that how you have to apply this concept of the output gap in your examination questions. क्योंकि यू नो कि असल चीज़ हमारा सिर्फ कॉन्सेप्ट लेना नहीं है. द मेन फोकस ऑफ दीज लेक्चर्स इज टू अटेम्प्ट द क्वेश्चन, टू शो दिस एप्लीकेशन टू द एग्जामिनर कि आपको पता है कि ये आउटपुट गैप की एप्लीकेशन क्या है. So whenever there is a question that comes to you related to the fiscal policy या फिर कोई भी policy related questions जो होते हैं उसमें हमारा ये output gap का analysis use होगा, and it would be definitely give worth to your question. ठीक है, अगर आप करोगे तो आपको बहुत अच्छे marks उसमें मिलेंगे. Now let's apply this concept in the graphically in the question. It is that this is the real GDP and this is the price. Again, the labeling is too much important. Then this is going to be your aggregate supply curve. Okay, you can see that this is the aggregate supply curve, and it is that this is your point of the full employment where your resources are getting fully employed, and this is the equilibrium price. Now if the aggregate demand is at this point, you can see that there is a negative output over here because the potential is here but the actual is here. ठीक है, पोटेंशियल ये है, एक्चुअल ये है. सो देर इज स्टिल अ कैपेसिटी दैट वी कैन इंक्रीज द एग्रीगेट डिमांड. ठीक है, वी कैन यूज द एक्सपेंशनरी फिस्कल पॉलिसी. हम अपनी डिमांड की एक्सपेंशन करें, एक्सपेंशनरी फिस्कल पॉलिसी बाय रिड्यूसिंग द taxes or by it is that the government can give the subsidies. So in this way we can use the expansionary fiscal policy. Now again our aggregate demand curve has been shifted to this point. You can see here that there is a reduction in the gap of full employment of the resources or the potential growth and the actual growth. बट यू कैन सी कि यहाँ पर प्राइस पे या किसी चीज़ पे कोई इफेक्ट नहीं आ रहा. सो व्हाट इज द लेवल ऑफ द एग्रीगेट डिमांड? इट शुड बी वेरी क्लोज टू दिस potential, like this y3. This should be your aggregate demand curve, where there is a very lesser gap between the potential and the actual. Only then there would be an increase in the inflation if the government is focusing on increasing inflation. You remember, those who have seen my videos, मैंने उनको ये बताया था that it is not inflation is every time dangerous for us. कभी कभी इन्फ्लेशन गुड भी हो जाती है व्हेन वी आर इन अ डिफ्लेशनरी सिचुएशन. सो इफ द गवर्नमेंट एम्स टू increase inflation, then they can use this policy that to increase the aggregate demand to the extent where it becomes closer to the potential economic growth. Then another thing, if this is your real GDP, this is your price, and this is going to be your long run average supply curve, this is going to be your aggregate demand, and this is going to be your price, and this is your full employment of the resources. Now, if the government increases the aggregate supply to this level, if the government increases aggregate supply to LRAS1, what is the benefit? क्या फायदा हुआ? The aggregate demand is not intersecting the long run aggregate supply curve, which is the new one. So it is not beneficial. इसका तो कोई फायदा ही नहीं हो रहा. So the government has to increase to that level where the aggregate demand also exceeds to that level. अगर aggregate demand नहीं exceed कर रही, तो definitely they should be using the other policies. उनको दूसरी policies use करनी है aggregate demand को increase करने के लिए. Children, I think so this is very much clear, and I have made this concept of the output gap, how it is to be applied in your questions as well while deciding about the policies and giving the suggestions to the government.